Yeah, sounds good. Let me share my screen. All right. Oop. All right, can you guys see my screen? Great. Uh, so yeah, I wanted to do a presentation about a general framework for curation markets. So in particular, this kind of addresses some of this subjective, curating stuff based on subjective criteria, so sort of like curating content. So I'm not speaking directly about subjective TCRs. I know this is something people were interested in, but a lot of this pretty much applies to subjective TCRs as well. So with some slight modifications can also be applied to that. So yeah, so let's jump in. So just some background on curation markets and why we're kind of like, why we would want to curate, have a content curation market as just to kind of figure out a way to crowdsource and create incentives for people to help us kind of filter content online, because as we know, a lot of the kind of content distribution systems are sort of broken because of incentives based on advertisement, and kind of AI is optimized to serve content that's best for advertisers or people making money from advertising. So kind of to start thinking about this curation market for content, I want to start with a different example that's a little bit easier to reason about. So kind of this abstract example of a curation market that's a decentralized job recruiter platform. And the way it works, right, employers would post a bounty for open positions. Then anyone online or whoever can start curating job applicants by staking on the qualified candidates, right? And then, so basically, the employer gets this crowdsourced list of applicants ranked by the amount of stake, and then they can start going in and start actually interviewing people and hire the most qualified candidate, and then whoever staked on the candidate that got the job gets a portion of this bounty that the employer originally posted. So kind of if we look at this analogy, bring it to this content world, right? So we can create a similar system where we have a bunch of content out there. Anyone can invest or stake on, quality content or successful content, right? But there's this missing piece of, right, in our recruiter platform example, there is this final step where the employer actually chooses the qualified candidate by some specific criteria, whether it's an interview or whatever that may be. So we kind of don't have this component here. So how do we make this final determination of what is, successful, what is this quality content? So kind of the simplistic approach is to use stake itself to determine this success, but I'm going to talk about why that's problematic. So the reason these are some general curation market pitfalls that we want to avoid in designing our system. So we do want to avoid, generally in any market, right? You don't want this self-fulfillment property where the price of the asset starts impacting the underlying value of the asset. So it's kind of this like self-fulfillment, self-referential thing, right? If we think about prediction markets, that's when the prediction starts impacting the outcome, which is not something, right? That's not why we're building curation markets or prediction markets. We're building prediction markets, right, in order to try to predict stuff happening, not to like make stuff happen. And then there's some other issues, right? So like if we're using this bonding curve dynamics to have people stake, invest in content, there's all sorts of like pump and dump manipulation schemes, pyramid schemes. So those are easier to address, right? So in designing our system, we can solve these issues by basically preventing people from selling the contract. So people can't trade these things. You buy it, you buy some stake in a piece of content, you wait until the resolution date, whatever that time period is. Maybe it's 3 days, maybe it's a week. And then you either win some rewards or you don't. So this kind of eliminates these manipulation pump and dump schemes and risks. So the self-fulfillment one is a little bit trickier. So if we look, right, if we go back to our example with a recruiter problem, imagine that employers get lazy and they decide, okay, I don't actually need to interview the candidates. The top stake candidate always ends up being the best. I'm just going to go there and hire the top staked candidate. But that completely breaks our incentive model because there's no longer an incentive to actually find qualifying candidates and stake on them. Because now you can just kind of like see what other people are staking on, right? Nobody's enforcing this curation criteria anymore. Before, right, the interview would be the process where the citation criteria would actually get enforced. So people staking, they're basically making a prediction that, through this process, through this interview process, through this resolution process is what's gonna kind of resolve this market, where at this point, right, if we don't have that part, it just kind of, people can start like meme voting, or people can just like start, some like a wealthy sponsor may just stake on a candidate that they really want to get hired. So our kind of, our whole system breaks down. So it's similar thing happens in prediction markets, right? So in prediction markets, in assassination markets, is an example of this like self-fulfillment market, where you basically make a bet of like something huge. You say like 3 million person, you bet $3 million that person X is not going to get assassinated, and then that's basically equivalent to a $3 million bounty for that person to get assassinated. So we don't want that. This is just like if we want to start doing simulations and doing like formal analysis of the model, it's just like an example, right? So our payout only depends on how much we staked and how much everybody else staked on this person, versus, we want the payout to be dependent on how much we staked and some sort of curation criteria. So if, like, formally, there's no way to like insert any sort of curation criteria in here, right? With objective, if something is easy to observe and is like very objective, you can make an argument that kind of, if you have enough people here that, there is some, some of this like objective criteria gets fulfilled. It's a little bit hand wavy, but in theory it can be done. with something more subjective, this will break down. So we want our staking to be independent of the actual final curation component, right? We want to decouple those two things into two steps. So use staking for signaling, but not as an outcome. So we have this general framework, right? If we decouple those two things, we have this general framework where we start with some unfiltered data, we filter it by stake, which kind of provides some initial filtering, right? So this can be like done at scale, it's crowdsourced. You're eliminating a lot of spam. And then the final kind of funnel gets narrowed down to this this final resolution through an actual curation, through actual curation. So if we look at an existing, right, the big existing curation market like Steemit, that final part is missing. So it has all these dynamics kind of mitigating all these other risks, but there's no way to resolve the market other than just by looking at this amount of money staked on a post. So that's a self-fulfilling prediction market, right? There's no clear meaning to curation there. So the ranking does not have a clear meaning. And in general, these kinds of things, anything like market size will have a huge impact. Who has the token? Any sort of extrinsic incentives that users with a lot of tokens have, the preferences of whales will have an impact on the rankings. So all of these things are kind of are going to mess with our curation activity. So what we're doing in our protocol, in our curation market, we're using, right? So we're doing the curation portion, this final resolution of the market, via a Sybil-Resistant reputation protocol. So there's two things, right? We have tokens, and then we have this reputation scores that are not, they're not transferable. It's not, it's not really like, it's not a token at all. It's just like a reputation score. So users can use tokens to stake on content as a prediction, and then the content ranking actually gets determined by votes weighed by reputation. So in our framework, right, we have this like feed of content, and we order by stake. So for example, you can create an AI, a recommendation engine that sources all, maybe the most 10 or 50, right? It goes each day, finds the 50 best articles about blockchain, stakes a small amount of tokens on each one, in the hope that a few of these articles will get noticed by reputable actors, in blockchain communities, and then this AI, this algorithm will basically start earning income from staking early on, or being the first one to discover these articles and stake on them. So you can have like an advertising system too, where for example, if you're publishing an article and you want to promote it, you stake a bunch of tokens on that, again, with the hopes of reputable actors noticing it, and if they actually do think that it is valuable, your article gets more distribution, and you might also win some rewards. So now a little bit about Sybil-Resistant reputation. So in general, right, we're using tokens a lot of times in these kinds of systems to, we're using them as a tool as like a Sybil resistance mechanism. And it's a pretty good Sybil resistance mechanism because it makes it expensive to create millions of bots and do stuff with them. The problem, right, the trade-off there is you can't really avoid oligopoly, and then you have this problem of this, of this context being very opaque where you can't enforce very specific subjective criteria. So a personalized PageRank algorithm is a reputation system that's Sybil resistant. So we can use that instead of relying on tokens to provide Sybil resistance, right? So it has its own trade-offs, of course. So it's harder, right? It's hard to have, you can't have an Ethereum smart contract do this. It's a little bit, it'll be very costly. So the computation overhead is higher. Although it can be done, using something like TrueBit or Plasma, that would be fairly easy to implement that. It also requires a specific trust assumption, right? So the algorithm is not truly fully resistant. You need some users that are trusted to create this like trust anchor. And those are the only users that can create Sybil attacks. Everybody else in the network cannot create Sybil attacks, but you do need some of this assumption. You do need some users you can trust in the network. So how it works is you basically have this list of trusted users. So we're doing this per community. So each community basically starts out with a set of admins, whether it's the founders or some experts the founders invite. So these are assumed to be trusted. Each community can decide also on criteria, right? So there could be different decentralized identity service to kind of have a stronger or weaker identity requirement to be one of these admins. And then we have this network graph constructed. In our protocol, it's each edge is an upvote. So for users, it's upvoting users' comments. So if I upvoted Alice's comment that she posted, I'm signaling that I trust Alice, that she knows that what she's talking about. She's probably not a bot. So if I have some reputation, it gets transferred to Alice. It's Sybil resistant because all of the reputation kind of originates at this from these admin users. You can think about it as basically the probability. So the reputation scores are probability if I start my walk at any one of these trusted admins. So what is my probability ending up at this node or this piece of content? So that's basically the score. So if this user creates a bunch of Sybils and they all upvote this specific piece of content, the probability of ending up here doesn't change because you still have to go through this user, this original user. So whether you take the path from this user going directly or you go to one of his Sybil nodes, doesn't have any impact. So basically this graph includes both users and content. So then the content gets ranked also with using this PageRank algorithm. These are just some notes about defining, right? So defining these original trusted users. So you have some, like, when you start the community, you define what they are, and then you can have some sort of governance system for removing or electing new admin members. So the really cool thing about the system is that, right, you can use the reputation, again, to elect new members. So this reputation system has this like self-reinforcing feedback loop, which kind of prevents it, right? So it prevents it from degrading over time. So what we're actually looking at is using this like Wikipedia style elections where users, if they're electing new members, anyone can cast a vote and state a reason for their vote. But again, these votes are only used as signaling. And one of the existing admins has to actually go in and either approve or reject the whole election, the whole vote. So that's kind of a measure to prevent bribing attacks and sock puppet attacks. So what we accomplish, right? So we have this crowdsourced content discovery layer. So that's the staking filtering stage. So this is like kind of the top of the funnel. Then we narrow this funnel, with users. So like actual curation with users that have reputation, right? So we're also in fact decentralized and crowdsourced these ideas of expertise and authority with our reputation system. Because there's not like a hard split. It's not just like admins versus everybody else. There's actually a continuum between users, right? So there could be users that have zero reputation, but they have some tokens and they're only doing staking. Some users have some reputation and no tokens, so they're only curating. But right, the majority would probably be somewhere in between where they have some tokens and they have some reputation. So each time they upvote a post, they're doing a little bit of both. So there is this continuum of between staking and curating. So finally, just some takeaways. So staking in curating subjective things. Staking can be very useful, right? But it's not great for making curatorial decisions. It's great for signaling. So expertise, so we want to use expertise and reputation to actually enforce subjective curation criteria. Tokens are not the only Sybil-resistant mechanism out there. And we can actually use personalized PageRank to give us some Sybil-resistant qualities. And it's a very great token engineering primitive. And that's it. Here's some contact information. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Slava. We're going to take up 5 minutes of questions now. Spencer, there's a comment from Spencer Graham here. Just accurate to describe this as proof curation market, where the proof is the curation result, weighted by reputation. In other words, it's subjective version of Ocean's data set curation system. Would you like to elaborate a little bit further on that, or it's just in the chat?
Sorry, I'm like having trouble finding the chat now that I'm sharing my screen. Maybe I'll stop sharing the screen so I can see. Yeah, the concept is pretty much exactly the same as a proof curation market. So yeah, yeah, it's the same thing. So yeah, when I read Trent's thing, I was like, that's actually how we like met and started talking, because I read his thing and I was like, oh, well, we came up with a similar thing in our protocol. And that's how we kind of, that's kind of how we met. So yes. And the next question.
Another one from Custom.
So yeah, the trusted admins are they're not network wide. So we're breaking down the whole thing into specific communities. So it's kind of like subreddits. So those could be like topic-based, like finance or EU politics. They could be more broad and just kind of like values-based. But basically, each community determines their own set of admins. They may have, different kinds of off-chain tools to monitor activity and kind of. They can also decide on their own governance methods. So maybe there's some communities where the founders are just like, okay, we're the admins and that's it. There's no elections. And then it's up to users to decide whether they want to participate in that community or not. Some communities may be more open, where they have, a robust governance system where, admins get elected, they're removed. If you become inactive as an admin, you probably get voted out, and so on. So next question, what are possible ways trusted admins could be gamed, and which mechanism protect against such? So one big risk is the biggest risk is an admin going rogue, basically, and an admin creating a bunch of Sybil nodes. That's a very, very bad thing. We don't want that to happen. So we do want, part of the governance process, part of, the community would basically set requirements that they want for identity verification. So some communities might be like, okay, if you're like verified on Twitter, you can be an admin. So they have some sort of like recourse to having these people be real identities, real people, having recourse in the real world. And then the other side of that is off-chain tools, basically to monitor admin activity. So making sure communities can detect if an admin is doing something shady, and then being able to take action then, right? So then vote the admin out and so on. So those two things are kind of ways to mitigate risks, like this rogue admin risk. There could be other ways for like maybe other admins have some rights to mitigate that. So another risk is basically voting pools. So that's not really related to admins necessarily, but maybe there's like a bunch of users with fairly high reputation that all organize to vote in a specific way to kind of maximize their returns. And again, that kind of thing would also be a set of off-chain tools to help communities monitor that, that kind of behavior. And again, being able to have communities that are able to take actions. And they could be also escalating kind of responses where it's either, bad actors, or maybe they get downvoted at first. Maybe they get, maybe there's like a system for blacklisting specific accounts, so they have their reputation zeroed out, and so on. And just, yeah, this is a quick one. How do you deal with power concentration of the founders for initial bootstrap? So for small communities, it will be fairly concentrated. I think as community grows, the reputation protocol is pretty good in distributing and creating like a much wider distribution, especially compared to that of income and wealth and like tokens in general. So that the reputation is actually, in the long term and with size, it's actually much better for kind of distributing weights. And that's, yeah, I think that's all the questions. If there's any other ones, let me know. All
Sorry guys,
right.
my signal there cut for a little bit, but if you guys are happy, we can move ahead to the next speaker who'll be presenting. Thank you so much, Slava, for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm James.
Will you...
About to share my screen. Thanks again, Devin, for providing this opportunity. And thanks for joining, everyone. Let me know if you can see my screen now. Cool. We good? Is that working?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, it's working.
All right. Cool. So I'm going to start just by giving a high-level overview of creating public organizations with ERC 888 structure. And I'll start with a description of what public organizations are. And it's really just another way of saying DAO, or decentralized autonomous organization. And we're talking about collectively governed, transparent collaboration, which facilitates coordination around shared goals by reducing information asymmetry, like curation markets. And a good example of that would be the Bushwick Generator, which is a co-working space that's coordinating around the shared goals of the Bushwick community, and the technology space that's emanating from that really unique location. And you might remember the Foam's Curation Markets meetup at their awesome event space. So the structure itself, you can see at the top, and it's built using a nested mapping, which is included in our EIP. You can see the mapping from the address to a mapping of a string data type to an unsigned integer, and that's the value or balances. And here's another representation of that, which creates a circular hierarchy is the key point. And that means it doesn't have a top level or ground floor. Another example of that would be Drawing Hands, the art piece by MC Escher, which gets started and ends up where it began. Another would be the Mobius strip, which has one surface along that path you see in the middle, and a four-dimensional equivalent of the Mobius strip is a Klein bottle, which is being implemented as a part of the art project. If you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend it. Just a shameless plug for them. So just to give you that high-level overview and move on to like what you can actually do with it. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Stanley Ryder diagram, but you can use ERC 888 for any kind of intentional protocol design. Mapping types of users theta to desired outcomes x by implementing social choice functions f of theta that result in the valuable behavior. And some questions to consider while I'm giving this presentation are, why do you create? And what does life mean to all of us? And how can we incentivize positivity together? Another cool thing about 888 is you can think about grouping things together using Gestalt's principles, which are proximity, common fate, continuity, similarity, closure, common region, and symmetry. So you can start to think about hierarchical design patterns that don't rely on a top level or ground floor. And this is probably the most technical slide. I'm breezing through this to get to a demo, but a key point on this slide is that protocols map to dimensions. So anyone who's creating a protocol may define their contract however they see fit. Using the structure, it's part of the multidimensional protocol, and you can make it ERC 20 compliant, ERC 721 compliant, or both. And this opens up a lot of possibilities. For example, every context may have a set of action dimensions where you define action logic, and those can be used across dimensions as well. And then validating actions, tags, and associations between tags is really useful, and you can have combinatorials involving actions like react or review with the person's address. And overall, the main benefit of 888 structure is that context specificity, because you need that for value systems which are vulnerable to the main problems with DAOs or public organizations, namely Sybil attacks, which Slava did a great job explaining and talking about potential solutions for, and plutocracy, which is a big problem I think we can mitigate through context-specific value systems. Another tidbit is that we can actually define a set of action dimensions for protocol design itself, and that way incentivize development of useful protocols that bring people together. It's sort of like the idea of a cryptoeconomic primitive. Some practical use cases for 888 include collective governance, which I've been talking about. We call it human validated proof of work because it is subjective, contextualized, and there's potential for dimensional voting or staking based on that context-specific reputation, which Slava mentioned. And overall, curation markets and quality control, you can imagine a market for algorithms based on context-specific values or signals. And we definitely see a long-term possibility of universal income facilitated through multidimensional structure. We call it universal creativity because it's not basic. It's required that you actually create or add value in some way to create value on chain. So finally, what we're trying to do is populate the multi-market. And what's unique about the multi-dimensional market is it enables Gestalt interactions. So you can see there like A and B for C, D, and E as a small scale example, but it could be millions of tokens on one side and billions on the other. And that creates a lot of efficiency gains for developers and users. And there's so many different ways to populate the multi-market using Create, which I'll show you in a minute. You can just join and become member of a project like the Bushwick Generator, or the projects itself or themselves can be created by anyone. Anyone can add tasks or goals to those projects. You can create value by providing event space and contextualize that on the platform. You can record what you're doing to give people better ideas of what your goals are and how they can help, both through creating time and content. So that really just means how they use their time and energy. And then finally, making decisions is probably the most important aspect of coordinating around shared goals. So with that, I'll escape here and go to the platform itself. Here is just an example of a profile page with all the projects and tasks that I've been working on. Here is my reputation, which is another way of saying my wallet full of context-specific value. So you have all these different contexts down here. Some are hashes, some are words, unique arrangements of characters. And so I've got an amount of time spent working on each of these contexts, or within each of those contexts. So you can think of the tags like the first layer, if you wish. And so this balance is the same graph, but this would be a transferable token versus this non-transferable reputation. And here's just like a summary of how it all breaks down. Next, I'll show you this task page, which is just a fun little thing I did last night, trying to learn some differential geometry, and found this cool website. So I just created some content on this task, which is another way of creating value on chain, uniquely capable using the 888 structure because it is multidimensional. And you can also record the work you're doing to study a differential geometry here as well. I wanted to show you the validation module. So when I created this task, I added a bunch of tags you see right here. And so to validate, I would just like drag these sliders to indicate how aligned each tag is with the goals or my personal vision for the goals of this project and task. So I won't do it now because we don't have much time, but you can play around with this yourself, and the validation is context specific, as you can see here with all the different tags. Another way to validate is simply upvoting, or liking, disliking, commenting. Even just spending time viewing a page is a form of validation. And finally, just an example of a project that we're collectively organizing using the platform is the Rare Art Festival, the second Rare Art Festival, which is planned for May 18th, end of Blockchain Week in New York City. And so in here, we've got this task, the Rare AF Hangout, which is where I'm recording what I'm doing to facilitate coordination around this shared goal of a Rare Art Festival. And what I did first was just create a little walkthrough. So if you're interested, I can send you this link and you can get involved with the Rare AF planning. And when the event comes around, everyone will know what you did to make it happen. And that's the kind of contextualized accountability that we're looking to provide for all types of organizations, breaking down the silos that separate countries, government agencies, even private organizations like companies or even nonprofits. Some of them desperately need more transparency to achieve their goals, which are common, shared across the world, I think. And same for the crypto space. I think we could benefit from more transparent and contextualized work being done, because we're all kind of, especially in the curation markets, Gitter, I think there's a lot of similar ideas and implementations being created. With that, I really want to answer some questions because I know it's a lot for a 50-minute talk, but I really appreciate all your time and thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, James. If anyone has any questions, if you could just drop them in the chat or even feel free to unmute and ask yourself. Simon asks if it's still all live at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's create.xyz. I will give a fair warning that there is no deleting what you create on this platform. You will be able to edit. There will be a history of what you edit, and that's just part of the experimental technology we're building, but obviously has a bit of controversy around it. I'll put this back up on the screen because I think it's a simple structure that enables complexity, which I believe is good. It opens doors for a lot of different protocol designs. Yeah, so I think I understand what you mean, Ryan. In terms of the UX, everything is within a personal dimension. So like once you log on or log in, there's a specificity to every action performed, which is tied to your personal address.
Matt's, do you want to read out Matt's question?
Yeah, he said, I originally had trouble understanding the standard. Can you elaborate on how it's simply an index into separate token balances and count within a single contract? Effectively, we're just using identifiers, in this case, strings, and you can also use numbers, but numbers are strings. So that enables contracts with many identifiers that refer to specific rules or tokens. So that's kind of like a contract with potentially infinite tokens, and each one of those levels of information and functionality has potential for infinite, sub-levels, so to speak. And I'd describe it more like a design pattern, although we believe it's a standard way to design protocols. You know, the difference between ERC20 and 721 is confusing. It's kind of like apples and oranges. You know, those are both standard interfaces, which are just you know, required functions for compliance with you know, widely used exchanges and wallets. But 888 is a structure, so it's a new type of contract essentially when you're using that structure. Yeah, I'm familiar with the decentralized identifiers standard. I think it's really cool. I think the problem with it is it's just linked data, which is off-chain stuff. So we're trying to bring some of that on-chain, but you can certainly use DIDs for purposes that are, you know, like the JSON LD files are necessary. And that's good for privacy reasons and just, you know, general reasons as well. I think it'd be cool. I mean, you could use them as the strings in the contracts you're building too.
Right. Okay, cool. So,
Yeah,
I can see how any data can have associated values to it, but the actual content though.
so if you wanted to build another create dimension, so to back up, like our platform is a dimension within the multi-dimensional structure, and we're just building an infinite playground with syntactic freedom, so we can do experiments and learn. But you know, in terms of storage, like the strings are stored on chain, so you know that is accessible to anyone who's mining or participating, and you wouldn't have to necessarily use our platform, but we do store like the content and display it through our interface. Does that answer your question? You know, the content is retained by the network and displayed by the platform or using the platform. So I think the biggest problem with scalability is gas costs. I don't really think that you know, layer 2 scalability solutions are necessary for this. So what we did is abstracted away the gas costs so that users don't have to pay for gas, and that's helped with our scalability. You know, and in terms of like the chain computation, on-chain computation is not greater, and it's actually more context specific, obviously. So you can imagine validating within specific dimensions as opposed to validating the whole network. So it's a form of scalability solution.
All right, are there any other more questions for James at the moment? Otherwise, I'm going to open up the open floor discussion. And James, thank you so much for taking the time to present today. Actually, thank you to both our speakers. Thanks, Lava and James, both for your presentations. Will you guys be making any of your content available online or anything that any other resources that the community can use?
Yeah, I can tweet the link to these slides if you want. And the website is create.xyz.
Cool. Perfect. Thanks so much. We'll add it to the, do you guys remember there's a living TCR or curation markets document somewhere, I think on the Gitter. I think it's also an invite to this this call that you guys can also go and drop in any resources if you have any, or if you want to post about your projects in there as well. That would be a good place for us to look at. I'm just seeing a few more comments come through. So basically, I'm just going to close up the presentation side now. Everyone, you're also welcome to unmute yourselves and voice your questions yourselves and have more of a discussion, because be cool, I think, to get a few more other people involved in chatting in the school too. Veronica, do you want to start off for seeing your comment here?
Sorry, it's like really loud here. I just wanted to know, well, I just had a question actually. If you are removing the gas cost from the user so that the user doesn't have to pay for the gas cost, how are you planning on paying for that gas cost without having to do horrible things like make ads?
That's a really good question. Sorry, I was muted. We've got a network that is a fork of Ethereum for the time being. We're just sponsoring all the gas payments using a master account. There's also meta transactions, which abstract away the gas costs. I think it's a really neat solution. We're not selling ads to fund the platform. It's not much in terms of hosting costs and whatnot. But the gas costs we're abstracting away using this hybrid infrastructure for now. So it's not a problem, but it's a short-term solution. Ultimately, we'd love to integrate or collaborate with Ethereum or other networks with more security, and gas definitely makes sense for resisting Sybil attacks in terms of like contract development. There's a lot of useless contracts on Ethereum, I think, that would have kept running if it weren't for gas, obviously. So we're just trusting a select group of contracts that we're developing, but anyone can deploy just like Ethereum and pay for gas. Oh, I just saw Matt's question. Yeah, I think this is starting to get to where my expertise ends, and you'd need to talk with Trevor, my co-founder. But in terms of scalability, we haven't encountered any problems. We're definitely small and like just getting started. But the storage costs are nominal. UX definitely matters, but it's a matter of like internet connectivity and like speed. We can do optimistic UI design to avoid problems like that. Where it matters is like around validation or decisions being made. You can't be too optimistic.
So James, if this is running on a fork of Ethereum right now, just to sort of kind of deal with those gas costs, how do you see the multi-dimensional kind of reputations being, and sort of context-specific reputations being used maybe within contracts on the main chain? Like how would you actually bridge that?
I mean, you can do it. It's not really a way to like increase your gas costs unless you think of it as a way to like increase the amount of activity on chain. There's definitely a lot of people who are interested in hybrid infrastructures, but security is paramount. But it's possible to deploy a multidimensional contract on Ethereum.
So one idea that sprung to mind from this is, so I can see how you can then go increase the reputation within your own context. So if I'm correct, you would go my account followed by whatever context, and then the value that you're setting forward. But does this mean that there is a potential for, say, a third-party contract, a separate account, or someone else to actually set a reputation in my context, potentially? Or?
No, the property of create as a protocol is that creators are in control. So you don't create other people's reputation. You're only creating your own. You can attest that somebody else did something, but if that's not validated within your context, it doesn't matter. So if you have a reputation that says, well, this guy's a whistleblower, and then you say that somebody else did something, people might listen, and that would give you reputation as a whistleblower. But you're not able to deduct any points or like add points to other accounts.
Okay, I sort of missed the part about the attestations, but
That just simply means making claims like with the content or work you're doing.
all right.
Like if you wanted to write somebody else's name in a post, it's not like you could adjust their value, their reputation with that post directly.
Okay, just on a slightly unrelated note, there's also Emily, sorry, I know you're on the call, you probably haven't spoken up yet, but Emily runs a token curated registries call as well every month. I think the next one is on the 24th of this month. So it's similar to this call, except they focus exclusively on token curated registries.
Yeah, there's one on the 24th, and we're going to be talking about anonymous voting and how that's different from PLCR voting. And Jeff's, and I think both the presenters are on this call, and also something called conviction voting, which is coming out of the research center called Block Science, and Jeff is going to introduce us to that concept.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks so much for that intro. If I'd like to join that, so I'll send you through a message. Okay, it's a message from Matt as well. Maybe anyone who wants to join on that, Emily, is the place that we can go to sign up for that?
So you can come into the Telegram. I think you were talking about a document that has kind of all these calls on them. The Telegram link should be there. I just send out an invite to email. So if you join the Telegram group and give me your email, you can get on the calendar invite. I think the Zoom link is also in that document. So you can just click the Zoom link when it's January 24th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Thanks so much. I just dropped the link as well to the document if anyone didn't have it before. I think that's the right document. Please be the right document. But that's basically got all of our upcoming calls as well as the TCR community calls as well on there. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining the call today. It's really cool to see quite a few of you are quite regular right now. This is our third call, and we're hoping to keep this going for quite a while. The next speakers as well, I've got so far Billy Renekamp has signed up for the next call, and I'm still looking for another speaker. So if you are interested, you're welcome to just drop me a message as well with your topic. If you guys do have any suggestions for improvement, if you would like to help out with the organization or moderate the next call, you're also more than welcome to. And we'll be posting a link to this recording online later this evening. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Gonna wrap this up here.